To Jeffrey. Jeffrey Rosario is an assistant professor at Loma Linda. He joined us 2 years ago there. He last year completed his PhD in history at the University of Cambridge, Trinity College. He recently wrote the historical background of Sabbatarian Adventism. Glad you're here. Jeffrey, what do you have to say?
Well, not much after that, but I'm going to take a historical snapshot. I'm going to look at the way that the cosmic conflict motif is weaponized. I'm going to use a lens through American political and religious history. So the theme for the conference raises the question, right? Is cosmic conflict still relevant? And so I think that a perspective that takes a look at American political and religious history suggests that it is deeply relevant because of the way that it impacted the origin story of the Americas and the way that it still impacts people's thinking today. It has and continues to influence religious and political culture in this part of the world, especially when religion and politics intersect. So a thesis of sorts would be that the story of America points to a stark reality, and this is the reality. That cosmic conflict theology, that motif, is dangerously vulnerable to ending up in the wrong hands. Ideas matter, and those who wield these ideas can enact serious damage. I think that's the story of America. Now, I'm thinking specifically of a particular version of cosmic conflict. When evil, the category of evil, gets identified with certain people, with certain cultures, with certain nations, then the powers that have self-identified as good find not only justification, but an imperative to eradicate that which they deem evil. A particular version of cosmic conflict, not the version that I'm endorsing, a particular version of conflict has played a key role in the project of American imperialism from the very beginning. So, throughout the history of the Americas, I'm thinking North and South America, religious and political leaders have co-opted and weaponized the notion of good and evil to facilitate an abuse of power. This idea, cosmic conflict, in these warped versions, was one of the strongest ideological influences that motivated colonization, conquest, and war. The New World was understood as a battleground between the forces of good and evil. I'm looking at the early documents. There's a long tradition of American political and religious leaders enlisting the motif of good and evil to justify oppressive domestic and foreign policies. So I'm interested in this time to take a historical approach to highlight maybe the glory days of Adventist worldview. How Adventists in the late 1800s and just at the turn of the 20th century leveraged an apocalyptic worldview to offer a corrective, you used the word corrective, to disassociate cosmic conflict themes from their political and distorted versions. Contrary to the national rhetoric that was popular at the time, early American thinking, that envisioned evil as external, evil is out there, embodied by other people, other cultures, other nations. Adventism's unique view of cosmic conflict informed a scathing critique against American exceptionalism. They turned the prophetic locus of evil inwardly within the American state itself. So this warped version of cosmic conflict was very much in the minds of those who colonized this part of the world. So I'm thinking of historian Jorge Cañizares. He uses these phrases that I'm fascinated with. One of the phrases is the geopolitics of evil. He uses another phrase, the geopolitical mobility of demons. And what he's trying to describe is what Europeans believed about the devil, about the cosmic conflict, and that is that the devil had been completely unchallenged in the New World for centuries. They believed that the devil moved around, I'm quoting here, the globe, picking and choosing his real estate carefully. And that the New World was Satan's prized real estate that had for centuries, and he had for centuries held that land, and its barbaric people in darkness. So Satan chose the New World as his fiefdom, and colonization was perceived, as I'm going to point out right now, by both Catholics and Protestants, as an ongoing epic struggle against a stubbornly resistant satanic landlord. Puritans in colonial Massachusetts, Spanish Catholic conquistadores, deployed the same language, a virtually identical cosmic conflict ideology to justify conquest and colonization. It was a biblically sanctioned interpretation of expansion. It was part of a long-standing Christian tradition by that time of holy violence aimed at demonic enemies. So the main point of similarity between Protestants and Catholics was the way that they weaponized the motif of good and evil, and they made it central to their mission in the New World. Now, there's tension here because New England Protestantism was obsessed and fixated with arguing that they were the antithesis of Catholicism. They went to great lengths to convince us that they would not mimic the religious or political characteristics of the old world because it was tainted by papal influence. And I would interject here that when the Adventists show up to the party, it gets really interesting because they find themselves in a unique position against both Protestant and Catholic visions of America, precisely because of Adventism's view of cosmic conflict. I'll get to that later. So, the first published history of New England, titled The Wonder-Working Providence of Zion's Savior in New England. This is 1654. The author was one of the early settlers of Massachusetts, celebrating New England as God's elect land to enact the final triumphant overthrow of Antichrist. And it's interesting to notice the amount of colonial writing on the book of Revelation. It was an obsession. Jonathan Edwards, who's considered one of the towering intellectual figures in colonial America, identified American soil specifically as the providentially favored real estate for the ushering in of Revelation's millennium. To Edwards, the American continent was in complete darkness under the sinister dominion of the devil. I want you to keep in mind that phrase, the geopolitics of evil. Poor nations of Indians, and they were held in the grossest heathenism, in the grossest darkness, until God sent the Europeans to cast down the kingdom of Satan in these parts. So salvation history hinged on the events taking place in America. And to Edwards, and virtually all of the leading colonial thinkers, war was one of the most important affairs in the entire universe. That's a quote actually from Edwards. Why? Because military campaigns against the representatives of the kingdom of darkness, read indigenous tribes, read the French, etc., was necessary to set in motion the right conditions. So Edwards' eschatological vision for America meant control over the new world. And that control would determine the outcome of God's redemptive plan for humanity. So I want to stress here, this is all cosmic, steeped in cosmic conflict ideology. Now, by the way, it's only 34 years between the death of Jonathan Edwards and the birth of Mr. Joseph Bates. So the Adventist story is not too distant from all of this. Edwards' framework would help shape notions of manifest destiny from the eastern seaboard, the rush west, because there's more real estate to reclaim from Satan's dominion. And so by this time, America is the Christian nation, the token Christian nation among Protestant Americans. But before, actually I should mention Lyman Beecher, who said that America was destined to lead the way in the moral and political emancipation of the world. So by 1890, their toes are dipped in the Pacific Ocean. They've reached the West. 1890 U.S. Census claims that the frontier had closed. That's it. We made it all the way to the edge. And looking now into the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, Americans now steeped in conflict, cosmic conflict ideology are thinking now, where do we go from here? Where else do we chase the devil? And they look abroad. And it's by 1898, just 8 years after that census, that we witnessed the United States official debut. I'll say this carefully in case there's any foreign policy historians in the audience. Official debut as a formal imperial colonizing power in overseas. I mentioned for overseas because this has already been that domestically. So U.S. Government officials and leading religious voices are invoking the good and evil concept repeatedly in this era. As the U.S. government flexes its military power on the world and seeks popular support. So a particular version of cosmic conflict ideology played a key role in the project of American history from the very beginning. Enter Adventism. Turn of the 20th century. In direct opposition to this ideology and to this American tradition, Adventists were themselves staunch advocates, as we all know here, of a cosmic conflict view of the world and of reality. Adventists set in their very theological framework the heart of the great controversy between good and evil, found in the heart of the book of Revelation, etc., etc. And yes, this had deep political implications. So why couldn't this have made Adventists, early Adventists, vulnerable, susceptible to the type of warped cosmic conflict ideology that we've discussed? So I emphasize that it is because of the unique perspective that positioned them to offer a fresh critique against the way politicians and religionists weaponize this one, while at the same time they clung to their own version of it. What was their own version of it? That the prophetic locus of evil was inward, within the American nation itself, and had been since the beginning. We can boil this down in one simple sentence. Probably, I guess not simple. One sentence. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 11. And it reads like this. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. And it had two horns like a lamb. And it spoke like a dragon. I've been reading those words for a long time, and it just still kind of makes me shiver a bit. We have a lamb. We have a symbol of good. And we have a dragon. We have a symbol of evil. We have the cosmic conflict distilled, but in the political arena. As early as 1851, Adventists claimed that that beast, in that text, in that sentence, was a political power that would present itself as if it were a lamb. But by its behavior and by its legislative declarations, it would reveal that it was actually inwardly a dragon. And that imagery of lamb-like dragon beast really heightened the tension between good and evil. It was the manifestation of the great controversy on the social and political plane. The cosmic conflict could be mapped out, Adventists claim, in the policies, in the history of that nation. And as my brother pointed out, that nation was none other, to early Adventists, than the United States of America. To Adventists, the religious and political culture of these United States was infected with the dragon's breath. They could trace this dragon nature in the history of the nation's coercion. How much time do I have, by the way? 3 more minutes. Wow. So, the nation goes abroad and colonizes foreign lands, such as the Philippines. And during this period, Adventists find themselves with a microphone in their face at a very dangerous time. And religious periodicals were so sure that this was God's will, that they declared that any opposition to U.S. foreign policy was an invention of the devil himself. And Adventists, of course, publish front center in the Adventist press pictures of the devil speaking to Lady Liberty, showing Lady Liberty the world, and inviting Lady Liberty to conquer. And of course, this, as you can imagine, is very provocative, because that picture is from Matthew chapter 4, the temptation. And the problem here is that the dominant view in the United States was that the devil needed to be conquered in those far-off lands, and so God was leading us there. So Adventists come and they turn the table and they say, actually, it's the devil himself whispering into our ears. Fast forward a few, World War I. The enemy always changes depending on which way the wind is blowing. And now the enemy is the Germans. And the German Kaiser, all over the news in the United States, was the Revelation's Antichrist. 666, the Adventist Press publishes front page. Is Kaiser 666? Question mark? And I'll let you guess how that went. What are you doing now, right? Spread this thing. Throughout this particular period of the 20th century, Adventists are repeatedly showing up. And rather than pointing the prophetic knife outward to a foreign enemy, Adventist theology was turning the knife inward on their own nation. And stop looking out there, so to speak. Look in the mirror. And just indulge me with one passage here as I bring this to a close. Because Ellen White then shows up to this party. And lest Adventism settles in a comfortable posture as the whistleblowers of these things taking place outside the church, Ellen White turns the whole thing and brings the mirror to the church itself. And Ellen White says that we have far more to fear from within than from without. She tells the generation of Adventists, indulge me here, the more we study the book of Revelation, the less inclined we will be to look out there for the cosmic conflict and to look inside. She says, the student should learn to view the Bible as a whole, should gain a knowledge of its grand central theme, God's original purpose for the world, the rise of the great controversy. He should understand the nature of the two principles that are contending for supremacy, and should learn to trace their working through the records of history and prophecy to the great consummation. Should see how this controversy enters, and I stress, every phase of human experience. How in every act of life we reveal the one or the other of the two antagonistic motives, and how, whether we will or not, we are now deciding upon which side of the controversy we will be found in. In other words, the unique perspective of the Adventist cosmic conflict motif was not only relevant in the political arena, where it was able to turn the tables and create a situation where Adventism had baked into its theology the right ingredients to help it resist Christian nationalism and this obsession with Christian imperialism. But furthermore, its uniqueness was that it looked at the kernel, the heart of this motif that should be placed in the human experience. That is, it is very easy to be under the illusion of personal righteousness and to point away from ourselves and to localize the danger out there instead of looking at the cosmic conflict in its true power to reveal human nature itself. This is honestly my closing. I promise. Far from being opposed to a cosmic conflict motif, Adventism was and is obsessed with it. I think rightfully so, for its explanatory scope. Adventists suggest that the misuse, the weaponization of the categories of good versus evil is itself a manifestation of the great controversy between good and evil. I don't have time Their reading of Revelation 13 informed the critique against the ways in which religious and political entities weaponized and misrepresented the character of God. C.S. Lewis said, "Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered." So I close and I say, good cosmic conflict theology must exist, if for no other reason, because bad cosmic conflict ideology needs to be answered.
Yep.
Thank you.